So SAS, what is SAS exactly? SAS stands for Statistical Analysis System. Well, you can basically think SAS as a database. That contains variables and its observations. Yes, guys, we are in the age where we deal with data. Yes, there's loads of data. Data like, let me cite an example. Like, there's something called employee database. Every organization has an employee database. And what does this employee database contain? Employee name, employee email address, employee age, employee salary, etc. So there must be, like, every organization, no matter big or small, contains too many observations. Now, do you think we can keep all this data in an Excel? Suppose the organization has like 25,000 employees. So can we store all the data in an Excel sheet? Probably your answer must be yes, that's possible. Okay. But what about if an organization has like 2 lakh employees? Well, that's too much. I think the Excel sheet can hang up. This might not be possible. This was possible in case of thousands, but when it comes to lakhs or crores, so that's where Excel fizzles out. And that's where SAS steps in. So the need of SAS has come up with the fact that it can store bulk of data. This is the power of SAS. SAS can store huge amounts of data and can also process it easily. That's why SAS is very popular. Let me tell you, currently SAS has a market share of over 50%. As far as I have seen the stats, it's 53 to the exact, so which is a really great market share. So the features of SAS are it can store data, in fact huge data. SAS can easily process huge data, and more importantly, SAS is more secure. Definitely, data security is an important concern. So which is why SAS has come into play. So let's begin with SAS. That what exactly is SAS? How does normally you must have seen data in an Excel sheet or a CSV file, or it could be a flat file. You must never have seen a SAS data set. Nobody saves data in the form of a SAS file. So what to do? This could have been more convenient, because everything like an Excel file extension is XLS. A CSV file has an extension of CSV. Similarly, a SAS dataset has an extension of SAS 7B DAT. So now, whatever SAS data comes, we have to store it in a SAS dataset with .SAS7 DDAT extension. So how to do it? Imagine I have an employee Excel sheet and I have to make a SAS dataset. How to do it? Well, SAS dataset can be generated via two steps. Okay, so how do we make a SAS dataset from an XLS file, employee.xls file? Basically, you can do it by two steps. One is the data step, second is the PROC. These are two concepts. We will be going one by one. First, let's focus on the data step. Guys, are you able to follow me? What I'm trying to do here? Okay. Abhishek, are you there? Okay. Okay. Let me simplify. Suppose I have Ajay, whose age is 25 and whose specialization is SAS. I have Ram, whose age is 27, whose specialization is Java. And I have Ramesh, whose age is 23 and whose specialization is SQL. I have this data and I have been asked to make a SAS dataset out of it. So I can write data test and then I can write an input statement with name, age, subject. Okay, let me tell you there are some certain keywords I mentioned right now. Data is actually a keyword. Input is also a keyword. Run, this is also a keyword. Basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make a data set known as test. Sorry. Test is a data set where I'll be inputting the data, these three rows, in a test data set. How can I do that? Let me tell you. Input is actually a keyword where you mention the headers, the variable names, named as name, age, and subject. Exactly in the order of the observations I am seeing here. First one is the name, second one is the age, third is the subject. Okay. Speaking of variables, in SAS we have only two types of variables. One is a numeric variable and second is a character variable. Name here is a character variable. 25 is a numeric value, so this can be a numeric variable. And SAS, yes, this is a character variable. And the way of notifying that in SAS, telling SAS that via the input statement we are mentioning three variables. For a character variable, after mentioning the name of the variable, we mention a $sign. Same for subject. Now what does this $sign indicate? Okay. Let me tell you in more simplified language. What SAS does is, SAS, as we as users, we tell SAS which one is a numeric variable, which one is a character variable. We wanted name to be a character variable, and character variables are denoted by a $sign. That's why I mentioned name, $. Age, as a user, I wanted to tell SAS that age is a numeric variable. So I just simply keep it as age. And subject, I wanted it to keep it as a character variable, which is why I mentioned a $, again after subject. Then how do I enter the data? There is another keyword here known as data lines. And I mentioned these lines. Okay guys, what is data lines? Data lines is basically a keyword where we can enter our observations directly, like hard-coded values. I wanted to enter these 3 observations. So I mentioned the data lines keyword, semicolon, and then I mentioned those 3 rows, and then again semicolon, and then run. So let me tell you again, what exactly did I do? I created a test data set. I mentioned the name of the variables using the input keyword, input, name, age, and subject. Here name and subject are my character variables, which is why I had to mention a $sign after the name of the variables. And then I have to mention the rows, which is why I used the data lines keyword. And I mentioned those 3 rows, and then semicolon, and then run. The moment I execute this, what happens on the SAS window? A data set gets created. A SAS data set test gets created. Containing these 3 observations. Now, what do I mean by a data set, SAS data set test gets created? It gets created in a physical location, right? There must be some path. I just wrote data test. When I say this, SAS, what SAS does is, it creates a test data set in a default location. And that is known as work. Or to be more precise, work library. Now what is this library? Library is actually an association to a physical location. Location as in a path. Suppose you can mention the path as an organization, employee, and a test data set. So this is actually a complete path. This is known as library. Speaking of library, there are 2 types of libraries. One is a temporary library, and second is a permanent library. Now what does this mean, a temporary library and a permanent library? Guys, are you able to follow me? Abhishek, Deborah, any doubts? Yes. Yes, I'm telling you. Yes, permanent and temporary. So what is a temporary library and what is a permanent library? Temporary library also gets saved in a work library, and permanent also, it gets saved in a permanent location, as the name suggests. So what is the difference between a temporary library and a permanent library? Work location is actually a temporary library. This is an important concept you need to remember. Work is a temporary library. Temporary library. So when I write only data test, it actually means data work.test. So this is a temporary data set. The difference between a temporary library and a permanent library is that temporary library only exists in a single SAS session. Once you close the SAS session, there's no more test data set. The test data set vanishes. So what's the solution behind? What can I do? If I want a test data set in the next SAS session itself. So what I do is I keep it in a permanent library, mentioning the name. I can do this. Libname, employee, the path, and voila. I created a SAS dataset in a permanent library known as employee. Guys, are you getting me? The difference between a temporary and a permanent library? To create a permanent library, I have to use a libname statement. Libname is again another keyword, and the syntax here is libname, the keyword, and then I mention the name of the library, which in this case was employee, and then I mention the path in quotes. And a semicolon. So this name of the library is actually a permanent library. And no matter if I close or open the SAS sessions, this will always be maintained. The association is always maintained. That's the power of a permanent library over a temporary library. Okay, let me focus on this part. Let me open a new window. Brilliant. Okay, I created a test data set in this employee library. Let's just focus like this. I'm creating a test data set and I'm mentioning my observations over here. So I'm hard coding the values. For now, it was convenient for me to mentioning 3 rows. But what about if there were like thousands or lakhs of rows? I cannot mention each and every row here, right? I cannot hard code this much. That would consume a lot of time. So there must be a convenient way of doing this. What to do? That's where we get an in-file statement. What is an in-file statement? Remember guys, I asked you a question earlier. Suppose I have an employee Excel file and I want to convert it into a SAS dataset. How to do this? The answer is in-file statement. Suppose in this Excel employee.xls file, I have these 3 observations. Okay. So I'll write data employee dataset, and then I'll write in file. I will mention the path. Along with it, the name of the XLS file, employee.xls. I'll keep this in quotes. I'll mention as the delimiter equal to XLS. And then I'll write input as the name of the variables, name, age, and subject. I mentioned a $sign here. And then I write run. Notice here guys, I didn't have to hard code this. I didn't have to mention this rows. This gets substituted by an in-file statement. Just one statement. What this in-file statement does is that it creates a SAS dataset from an external source file. By an external source file, I mean by this employee.xls file. All I have to do is mention the path and the file name, and then I use this option DLM. What does DLM stands for? DLM is nothing but the delimiter. A delimiter in case of Excel file could be XLS. For a CSV file, it is comma. For a flat file, it's something like this. What I'm trying to tell you here is the delimiters is nothing but the separation between the different values in an observation. Suppose I have a CSV file. This is my CSV file containing these values. These commas are actually the delimiters. Between the name, age, and subject, we have here commas here, right? So these are actually the delimiters. So in SAS, we have to mention the delimiter. When you are converting an external file into a SAS dataset, we write DLM equal to XLS. Deborah, can you follow me? Deborah, Abhishek, any doubts? Okay. Abhishek, can you follow me? Brilliant. So this is what an in-file statement does. We mention the complete paths and then the file name and then mention a delimiter. Okay, one more thing. One more concept comes in. Suppose this is my CSV file, right? Okay. And in the CSV file itself, I'm mentioning the variable names as well. Like name, age, subject. Okay. So this one is basically the header, and these are my observations. Okay. Notice here, the observation is starting from the second row. This is my first row, right? And this is my second row. So if I execute this code, what will happen exactly? Definitely we'll get an employee data set, but our first observation would be named as name, and then we will have an error here, and then we have a subject. Why is that? It is because our rows or observations are from the second row itself. The second observation is where we start our observations. So what we do that? What to do? Introducing another option known as first obs equal to 2. What does this mean? First obs equal to 2. First obs is actually an option in an in-file statement which tells SAS that here, hey SAS, our observation is actually in the second row, not in the first, which is why you have to read observations from the second. Had I mentioned here first obs equal to 3, it would tell SAS to start reading from here, from RAM, because this is the first row, this is the second row, this is the third row. So start reading from here. Are you able to follow me, guys? Abhishek, Deborah? So would the second observation get skipped when obs equal to 3? Yes, Deborah. That's a good question. And the answer is yes. If I mention first obs equal to 3, then what happens is that this is the first row, this is the second row, and this is the third row. If I tell SAS first obs equal to 3, it will start reading from here, from Ram 27 Java and Ramesh 23 SQL. It would definitely miss this row. That's a good question, Devda. Abhishek, are you able to follow me? Brilliant. So, okay. So we understood the infile statement and its two options known as delimiter and first ops. Okay. Suppose I have a CSV file here. Okay. In between, there is also another row I'm adding, whose name is Alka. I don't know the age of Alka, and her subject is SAS. Suppose there are 4 rows here. Okay. I don't know the age of the third row, which is Alka. I don't know her age. What would happen if I execute this code? Definitely. I don't know the age, so I want SAS to print data like this only, where the name of the third row is Alka, her age is missing value, and her subject is SAS. How to do that? Okay, let me mention another option known as misover. What is misover? Misover is actually another option of infile statement that tells SAS that between two delimiters, here comma is the delimiter, right? Between two delimiters, if there is no value, then SAS has to read that as a null value. Null value as in no value. So, suppose, let me open an Excel file for more convenience. Pardon me guys, my university edition is not opening, which is why I'm unable to show right now. But I promise you I will be showing you in the SAS windows itself in the next class. For now, okay, suppose I have name here, I have age, okay, this is hanging. Sometimes I don't like this. I have age, I also have subject. Okay, so this is Ajay, this is Ajay's age, this is SAS, and then we had Ram, 25, Java, and then we had Alka, whose age is what I don't know, and then we have Ramesh, whose age is 23, and its subject is SAS. So I want my SAS dataset to be seen like this. Okay, but this is only possible if I mention a misover option, because let me compare this from this one. Yeah, this is only possible if I use a misover option in a SAS dataset. Guys, I'm focusing in this row. Okay, I need a missing value here. Had I not mentioned a misover option in an infile statement, value would have come something like this. Alka would have been missing with age. Guys, are you able to follow me? Abhishek, okay. What about you, Abhishek? Okay. Okay, so guys, this was the infile statement, which has three options known as delimiter, first ops, misover. Okay. We also had an input statement that mentioned the name of the variables in SAS. And that's how we create a SAS dataset. Okay. Let me jump into another concept in SAS. Just a sec. Let me open another notepad. Known as SAS formats and Informat. Am I recording this? I'm not recording this, Abhishek. Would you need the recording as well? I guess the Harry must be doing it. Okay, you're writing it down, the codes, right? Okay, yeah, sure. Or if you can do this, you can take a screenshot of this. So that would be also the convenient, because I am not getting into the details, the technical part right now. I'm just covering the concepts as of now. We'll be getting into the practical sessions later, so don't worry. Okay. Okay, Ajay and Deborah, yeah. So what I was telling was SAS format and Informat. This is another very important concept. Basically, as users, we are telling SAS what to do, right? So whenever SAS reads data from an external file, like here from a XLS file, it's we who tell the SAS how to read the data and how to write it. That's what Informat and Format is. In Informat, we tell SAS how to read the data from external file. Okay. And what is format? Format is we tell SAS how to write the data in a SAS file. Actually, in a SAS dataset. This is a major difference. Okay. Let me help you here. Okay. Let me explain you with the SAS dataset itself. Okay. Suppose I have a dataset known as transact dataset. Okay. Where I'm inputting the ID, transaction date, and the amount. Okay. And prior to that, I have to also mention this infile statement. So let me mention an infile statement that contains the transaction data as a CSV file. Okay. And these are the three variables. And I simply write here run. Okay, so where does format and informat come into the picture in the first place? It's actually in the input statement where I mentioned the informat values. What do I mean by informat values? Okay, suppose I write here ID as $6 dot transaction date as DDYY10 dot let me keep the colon here. This itself a single statement, guys, so don't get confused. What I'm telling you is in this input statement, basically input statement was to tell us the header part, the variables part. Here we have three variables known as ID, transaction date and amount. What I've written along with it is the informat values. What was informat? Informat is we telling SAS how to read the data from an external file. Okay. So by $6 dot, I'm telling SAS that please read the ID variable values in $6 dot format. Read the transaction date in MMDDYY format and read the amount in 8.2. We are telling SAS to read the data. And then we also mentioned something called format. Guys, are you able to follow me? Okay, Abhishek. Okay, Abhishek, you couldn't. Okay. Okay, let me tell you again. Okay, Abhishek, you understand the difference between read and write, right? Read versus write. Good. Read is associated with in format and write is format. Okay. Informats are basically, let me tell you some example of informats. Okay, like $6 dot, MMDDYY10 dot. These are all informats. Suppose I have here transaction data. I have ID variable as 2567. Let me okay. Let me open a new Excel file. This. Okay. Suppose I have a ID variable. I have transaction date and also third variable, yeah, and the amount, right? And the amount. Right? And this is ID 2567. I have transaction date as 08 8th March 2015. Okay. And I have amount like 2600. Transaction is done. Okay. And there's another ID where the transaction was done on 4th of January 2016 with this amount. Okay, let me stick to these two. Okay, so let me show you the data here. SAS code. Okay. Okay, let me just focus on this code. Now we could understand that we are creating a transact data set, and we are pulling data from an CSV file or an XLS file in this case, using an in-file statement. Okay, and third is the input statement, where we are mentioning the name of the variables. Okay, this is the ID, this is the transaction date, and amount. Okay, along with these three variables, we are also telling SAS that how to read the data, as in mentioning the in formats. This is an in format for ID variable. This is an in format for the transaction date variable. This is an in format for amount variable. Are you able to follow me, Abhishek? Got it. Great. So by mentioning this in the input statement, ID as $6, transaction date as MMDDYY10, amount as 8.2, I'm actually telling SAS how to read the data of these three variables in this three respective formats, which is $6, MMDDY, and 8.2 for these three variables. But if I only run this, then it might read are all three strings. Well, yes, in this case, yeah, definitely. Because for ID, I'm mentioning a $. So this is a character variable. For transaction date, okay, let me tell you something about date variable. A date variable by default goes as a numeric variable. By default. So no, transaction date is not a string. Actually, we don't say it as string. We actually call it as a character. Abhishek, are you able to follow me? Yes. Yes, Deborah. That's a valid question. ID, yeah. ID, if we see the values, it contains numbers, right? 2, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. But definitely a numeric value can be mentioned in a string, right? Like this, 2, 5, 6, 7, quotes. Quotes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So yeah, it's a character variable in this case because we are mentioning ID as $. So this is a character variable which contains numeric value. Are you getting me? Yes. So please understand the difference here. A character variable can contain a numeric value. But a numeric variable cannot contain a character value. Obvious. Yes, Abhishek. How about what? Meaning 6.6. Is it a numeric or a string? Okay. A 6.6 is a numeric value. But if I write like this in quotes, 6.6, this will be a character variable. Okay? Yeah. So that's the deal. Okay, let me focus on this. Yes. Okay, so I mentioned I created a transact data set, and these are the informat values. Okay. Okay, so next is how to write the data. Okay, and that can be done via format statement. Guys, as I told you, format statement is what we are telling SAS how to write the data. As in write means how to print the data in a SAS dataset. Okay, so if I write here an input, the informats, so there will be a format statement where I'm mentioning ID as $6, transaction date as MMDDYY10 dot, and amount as $10.2. Are you getting me? What I did here? Abhishek, Deborah? Can you hear me? So how the input, so the input is how it is being read. Yes, yes, Deborah. Input is how we tell the SAS to read the data from an external file. So basically it does the informat work. And format is something we are telling SAS, after reading the data, please print the data like this. And the format is the appearance in the output data set. Exactly, Deborah. You got me. Okay. Abhishek, is that clear? Brilliant. So had I not mentioned this format statement, the values would have come very vague. In case of 8 March 2015, the value would have come something like this, like a figure 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And for 4th of January, it would have come something like 2967. I'm just speculating here, but this is how the values would have come in a SAS dataset. It comes in the form of numeric values. Why is that? Had I not mentioned this format statement, I mean commenting this for now. Okay. Had I only mentioned this, data, transact, the name of the dataset, the in-file statement, and input statement, and directly run. I'm not mentioning this format statement. The transact dates values would have come something like this. It is because we haven't told SAS how to write the data. And SAS by default considers a variable as in a numeric value. Are you getting me? Okay, brilliant. Abhishek, did you get me? Brilliant. So this is what the concept of format info. So basically, till now what we have covered, let me just note it down. We covered a data step. We covered something called library. We covered the in-file statement and in-file options. And we covered format and the informat. And yeah, we also covered data lines, where we are hard coding the observations. Any doubts still here, guys? Okay, Deborah? Brilliant. Okay, guys. What else can we cover right now? Because there's already a lot of covered in here. Okay. Okay, as I told you, there are two ways we can create a SAS dataset. From an external file, or you can say an external source. Okay, one which we discussed, which was the data step, and second is what we call, oh, I'm sorry, second is the PROC. Okay, there's one more concept I forgot to mention in the data step, pardon me, before entering PROC. Okay, suppose, okay, there's something called a set statement. Okay, now what is this set statement? I mentioned a data set known as transact. Okay, and there is already a data set in my library known as bank library, and I'm writing something like this: bank.transaction and run. For a moment, forget the set keyword. Okay, let's focus on this. Bank.transaction. Or let me simply write this: data bank.transaction and a write run. Okay, let's focus on this, guys. Could you tell me what is bank? No, Abhishek, bank is not a data set. Bank is actually a library, a permanent library. Yes, as Deborah stated. What is a transaction? No, the transaction. Yes, a transaction is a data set. Let me clear it out again. When you are referring to bank.transaction, bank is actually a library, a permanent library. And transaction is a data set in bank library. Is that clear, Abhishek and Deborah? Yes. Okay. But what if I write like this: data transaction and run? Could you tell me what is transaction? Yes, Deborah. Transaction is actually a data set. Exactly. And where is this data set being stored? In which library? Exactly. Work library. And what is work library? Is that a permanent library or a temporary library? Exactly. It's a temporary library. Always remember, work is a temporary library. and any other library name is actually a permanent library. Okay, like bank is actually a permanent library. You cannot call bank as a temporary library. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so by temporary library we actually refer to as work library. Okay, and why is it? It's called a temporary library. Could you tell me what would happen if I run this data set, I execute this data step, and I close the SAS session? Will I find this transaction data set in my next SAS session? No, exactly. Okay, guys. Okay, suppose let me talk about a small business scenario. We are SAS programmers here, and we work every day on a data set. Suppose I'm working on this transaction data set. This transaction data set is existing in a bank library. Okay. So I work on this transaction data set existing in a bank library on everyday basis. And I also understand this is critical data. The data that this library contains, this transaction data set contains, this is a critical data. So definitely my manager tells me that don't disturb the data. But work on this data set. Now, how can I work on transaction data set if I cannot make some changes? By changes, I mean add data or delete data or modify the data. How can this be possible? How can I work on this? That's where set statement comes into the picture. How can you use the set statement? Suppose I have to work on this transaction data set, but I shouldn't hamper this. I shouldn't make any changes in the bank library transaction data set. That's where I do this. I mention a temporary data set. I write a set statement, set bank.transaction, and I write run. Now what does these three statements mean? Set statement, what you mentioned along with the set statement is actually a transaction data set, the name of the data set. Okay, what we are telling SAS here is, hey SAS, create a transaction data set in a work library, and it should contain all the variables and the observations exactly from the transaction statement which was in the bank library. Which means I'm telling SAS to create an exact copy of bank.transaction data set in a work library. Could you get me? Could you understand what I'm trying to say here? Okay, brilliant. So that's how I work on this data set, the bank.transaction. I don't have to disturb this data set. I just create an exact copy of this. Why this three statements only? How easy is that? Okay, guys. let me move into another concept. Suppose I have two data sets, two transaction data sets. Okay, like transaction of the year 2016 .SAS 7 BDAT. Another is transaction of the year 2017 SAS 7 BDAT. I have these two data sets. Okay. My manager tells me to contain a database of last 2 years transactions. What he's trying to say is create a SAS dataset containing observations of 2016 and 2017. Now I know that I have these two data sets, right? I have these two data sets. So all I have to do is create a new data set. Suppose I do this. Data transaction, I mentioned it as data transaction final. Okay. And I write here run. But how to add these two data? All I have to do is add this data or append this data. As in, I do this. Set transaction 2016 and transaction 2017. I write it like this. What I'm telling SAS to do here, I'm telling SAS is to create a data set known as transaction final containing the data of transaction 2016 data set and 2017 data set. And that is achieved by a set statement. Are you able to understand me, Deborah and AJ? Okay, not this one? Okay. Okay, let me tell this again. Okay, you understood? Okay. Let me open a new file. Suppose I have a transaction data set known as transaction 2016. Cool? Okay. Where I have the name, I have the transaction date, and I have the amount. Okay, and there are some observations here. Ajay put a transaction on 8th April 2016, and he did the transaction of 2000. Okay. And there is Vijay, put a transaction of 2nd of Feb 2016, and he did a transaction of 5,000 rupees. Okay. And I also have this data set known as transaction 2017 data set. Okay. Let me copy this, paste it over here, where I have Alka who did transaction on 10th January 2017 with this much amount. Okay. And Ramesh coded transaction on 13th of Feb 2017 with this much amount. Okay. Are you clear on these two data sets? Abhishek? Abhishek and Deborah? Yeah. Deborah, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, brilliant. So what my manager tells me is that he wants the data of last 2 years. Last 2 years as in 2016 and 2017. He wants a single data set. Okay. So, which means he needs only one data set, because definitely it's not convenient to open 2 different data sets and view it on different windows, right? He just wants to view one data set in a single window. Okay. Which is why I have to make a final data set containing both the data of 2016 and 2017. Which means these are my variables and these are my observations. This is what my manager needs. Is that clear? What he needs is the data of 2016 and 2017 in a single data set. Okay. And how is this possible? Via this syntax. Okay. Guys, are you able to get me? Yes. So if I write a single set statement, set the first data set name space a second data set name, and I run in this data set, so it will create a transaction final data set and it will just append the data. They append the 2016 data with the 2017 data in the same order. Okay. This is the same as the view in SQL? Yes. Yes, Ajay. The difference is that here syntax-wise, it's very convenient. It's very, very convenient. You just have to mention these 3 lines. Just with a couple of keywords, data and set. And that's it. We get our data appended. Okay. Deborah, is that clear? Okay. Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay. Okay, there's one more concept here. Suppose, okay, let me create another file here. I have a transaction data set known as transaction A containing name, age, and amount, and a transaction B data set. Okay, containing name, age, and the transaction date. Okay. Suppose I write here Alka, say just 27, 2800. Okay. And I here have Ramesh, say just 25, and this is the transaction amount. Same goes here, Alka, 27, and transaction date is 8 April, and Ramesh, say just 25, and the transaction date is 10th. And I need my transaction data, transaction final data, containing all these 4 variables. If you notice here, in the transaction A dataset, there are 3 variables, name, age, and amount. Same for transaction B, there are 3 variables. But the difference being that transaction A has amount variable and transaction B has transaction date variable. And the common variables are name and age. But I need a data set containing all these 4 variables, name, age, amount, and the transaction date, with these values. Are you able to get me what I'm trying to explain here? Okay, yes. Okay. So how is this possible? How can we just add a new column along with dates? How can we make this kind of merge using set statement? That's possible if we do this. Okay. Yeah. If we do this, this is the syntax of doing merge of 2 data sets using set statement. What I did here is, in the set statement, I use set twice, one for each data set. Set transaction 2016, set transaction 2017. What it tells SAS, when we mention set for individual data set, it tells SAS from the header level that create variables accordingly. So for transaction A, if we write only set transaction 2016, it created 3 variables, name, age, and amount. Okay, and for the second set transaction 2017, it saw that there already name and age. The only variable missing was transaction date. So that's how this transaction date came into the picture. Are you able to understand me, Abhishek and Deborah? What is the difference between here in this syntax and the previous? Yeah, definitely. Good question, Deborah. Okay, for that, let me bring in Kip. Okay, what will be the problem in this is that if these 2 are my data sets, transaction A and transaction B, and I mention a single set, okay, this tells SAS to append the data, and this tells SAS to merge the data. Able to understand the difference between append and merge? I write a single set statement and two data sets, what will happen is that, just speaking hypothetically, if I write only like this, so from the header column, if I had written only this statement, if I had executed this syntax for these two data sets, what would happen? There will be a transaction final data set. Okay. And there would be had been three variables, name as name, age, amount. That's it. There won't be the fourth variable known as transaction date. We'll only have this data. If we execute this syntax. The thing about transaction date, right? This will be missing. You won't find this part in your transaction final dataset. So to merge, do we write multiple set statements depending on the number of datasets? Exactly. Yes, Deborah. To merge, we have to mention set for each dataset. Had there been three datasets, like set, there would have been a transaction dataset known as (2015). Okay, I would have written like this for merge. Am I clear here, Deborah? Also, how come transaction date variable column would show up? How come transaction variable column would show up for the current example you are doing? In which syntax? In the multiple set statements or in the single set statement? In the multiple set statements. Okay. Okay. So this is the power of SAS syntax actually. The moment I write set transaction, okay, this is a transaction A data set. And this one is B and this one is C. Okay. The moment I write set transaction A, set transaction B, set transaction C, once I write the set statement, the thing about SAS, okay, let me tell you about this concept. First things first. SAS executes row by row. Okay. By row, I mean one row at a time. Meaning here, this is row 1, this is row 2, this is row 3, right? This will be my row 1. This will be my row 2. This will be my row 3. Clear? So this is how SAS reads the data. It executes row by row. Okay. When I'm performing a data step, okay, suppose, yeah. When I'm doing this, okay, when I'm performing a data step, what we tell SAS to do is execute row by row. This has always been the case. It's not like that SAS automatically takes the data at a time. At one time only it will pick up all these 3 rows and it will execute. No, that's not how it compiles. SAS first executes row 1, okay, then it executes row 2, and then it executes row 3. That has always been. That's how SAS works. Abhishek, are you able to understand me? Abhishek and Deborah? Brilliant, brilliant. We are making good progress here, guys. Okay, so one row at a time. So here what we do is, okay, let's focus on this part. I have 3 data sets, okay, which has some common variables, name and age, and some new variables like amount in transaction A. Transaction B has transaction date is the new variable in transaction B, and transaction C has some new variable, suppose ID. Okay, so okay, so I want my final data set to look like this. Transaction file. Okay, name, age, amount, transaction date, and ID. Okay, and yeah, let me make a transaction C data set. Yeah, this is my transaction C data set, which contains name, age as common variables, and ID. Okay. And ID is 548 for Alka and 671 for Ramesh. Okay. So I need my final data set to contain all these 4 variables: name, age, amount, transaction date, and ID. Okay. And I want values to be populated like this. Okay. This is my transaction date from transaction B data set, and these are my IDs from the transaction C data set. Okay. So how can I do this? How can I pick data from transaction A, transaction B, and transaction C? How is this possible? This is possible by multiple set statements. This is the syntax for this. The moment I write set transaction A, set transaction B, and set transaction C, in the first set transaction A, it will pick up name, age, and amount. In the second set transaction B, it does pick name, age, and transaction date, but it has already these variables name and age in my final transaction data set. So these 2 variables will be negated. The only variable left is transaction date. That's where here transaction date came. And here in the transaction C, we have name, age, and ID. Again, name and age are already mentioned here. And there is a variable called ID, the new variable. That's where this came into the picture. What I'm trying to explain here, guys, is actually PDV, as in program data vector. And I will get into the details in the next session for sure. But for now, this is it. Are you able to understand me, Deborah? Did I answer your question? Brilliant, brilliant. Abhishek, could you understand what Deborah was asking? Brilliant, brilliant. So this is the power of set statements. A single set statement is used. Single set statement is used to append data, and multiple set statements, actually a statement, is used to merge data. Okay,